And now a highlight from Animal Radio on iHeartRadio.
But first, we're going to visit with Steve Kuusistos. Hi, Steve. How are you doing?
Hello. I'm great. How are you guys?
Very good. So let's tell listeners a little bit about your background. You were born legally blind. Is that correct?
Correct.
So could you see anything? Shadows, lights, anything?
If I put my nose on something, I can see what it is with one eye.
And that was in the 50s.
Correct.
So it was probably treated a little differently. Did you, I understand that you didn't want people to know that you were blind.
Well, my mother really felt that if people really fully understood how blind I was, I would have no place in society.
Oh.
That was her rural New England uninformed mode of thinking. And that pretty well colored the way she thought about disability. And so it's not an unusual story. Even today, there are people with disabilities who, don't get the kind of emotional support they need, and they grow up not embracing it.
I understand that you actually, as a blind person, you rode a bike around?
Yeah, I rode a bike around, and then later I rode a motorbike. Yes.
Blind.
And, and the truth is, that's not an uncommon story. Lots of blind people have stories like that. So I don't want to make myself out to be like a really singular person for this. I mean, it's a fairly common story, actually.
Okay, so how old were you before you got your first service dog?
I didn't get Corky until I was 38.
So for 38 years, you tried to pass off as being a sighted person.
Yes, although not very successfully. And then I decide, right, in my 30s, wow, you know what? Not only am I learning how to walk with a white cane and be a blind guy in the world, but I like dogs a lot.
So did the way your mother raised you, did it help you or hinder you, do you think, in the long run?
Oh, it did both. It made me incredibly adventurous, a thing I still am. And so, willing to do daredevil things. Certainly, I'm not a worrier about being in the world. That may have aided me when I trained with a guide dog because, of course, one of the things that you do is learn how to work the dog in urban environments. And I was in New York City with my first dog, Corky, who was mentioned in the book. And I'm plunging through New York traffic and having a hell of a good time, learning to trust her and discovering that I can go any place I want. So that's the upside of it. The downside of that kind of denial is that it takes you a long time to just decide, hey, I'm okay this way. Well, and that's not an unusual story either, right? Lots of people, whether they're gay or they're, they grew up with alcoholics or whatever it is, it takes them a while to finally figure out, wow, I'm good.
Yeah. But, we're all about animals here because it's animal radio, right, Steve? And I loved when you said, and hey, I discovered I really like dogs. What did you really love at first about guide dogs, and what do you love even more now?
Well, I grew up in a family. We always had golden retrievers, and they were wonderful dogs and great companions and fun to have around. And they'd lift your spirits no matter the day. And, they were playful and just loyal, terrific companions. So certainly I'd grown up knowing that dogs were just absolutely fabulous creatures. But one day I almost got run over in Ithaca, New York, where I was then living, a college town. I was using a white cane to navigate, which is one way that the blind can navigate. But the thing about the cane is it can't warn you if you step into the street and you haven't heard the traffic correctly, right? And so I was almost struck by a Chevrolet, and I'm sitting on the sidewalk with a stranger who helped me, and I'm tasting my heart in my mouth. And it dawns on me that I had read somewhere that guide dogs are trained in this remarkable thing called intelligent disobedience, that they will not let you step into harm's way. And that's, of course, because dogs are smart. And, guide dogs are the dogs that are selected not because they're obedient, but because they can think for themselves, right? They're independent. And I just thought, holy cow, you know what? It's like the light bulb moment where the Elmer Fudd light bulb goes off over his head, right? In the cartoon. I just suddenly realized, oh, yeah, a guide dog.
We got to take a quick break. We are with Stephen Kuusistos. We're going to talk about what it's like to train with a dog and his book coming up next. Stick around. It's Animal Radio, celebrating the connection with our pets and our guide dogs. And we're with Stephen Kuusistos, blind since birth, but has made great friends with several guide dogs. What's it like training with a guide dog?
When you're actually training with the dog, you very quickly come to realize that this is an exceptionally smart animal and that it has your back. It has your best interests in mind. And, of course, your job is to also have her best interests in mind, and you become a six-legged creature. You really do. You become a really deeply bonded team.
Tell us about Corky.
Well, Corky lived to be 13. She was my first guide dog. She came from Guiding Eyes for the Blind, which is one of a dozen great guide dog schools in the U.S. She was a very large yellow Labrador. I'd say for a female Labrador, really big. I'd say she was 85 pounds. She was extremely fast. Part of the joke was that they couldn't find somebody fast enough to give her to. They'd had her a little while at the guide dog school. And I am fast, and I came along, and they just took one look at me and went, Eureka, we have found Corky's match. And to this day, I'm still that way. I'm very speedy. I run. And so my current guide dog, who is my fourth, also from the same school, also a yellow Labrador, her name is Caitlin. She is also extremely fast. They've all been speedy. And my sighted friends can't keep up with me. They're like, okay, we'll see you at the next block,
So you've had four. Did they live their life with you, or what?
Oh, yeah.
Seems like four is a lot.
When they retire, typically they work roughly 7 years on average,
Okay.
right? They're 2 when you get them, and they work until they're like, say, 9.
Oh.
And, I did have a second guide dog named Vidal who worked till he was 10. But typically they retire. They slow down a little bit, right? Just like the rest of us.
Okay.
In dog years, they're a little older. And in my case, I kept all of them as family pets and got a new guide dog. And that, is pretty customary. If you're a blind person who doesn't have the kind of family dynamic and home where you can do that, you can return the dog and the guide dog school will find a home for it, or you can give it to a family friend or, neighbor or what have you. But absolutely, I've kept all of mine, and because after all, they're part of the family.
Sure, absolutely. Well, let's get to the book now. Have Dog Will Travel, A Poet's Journey. What is that about?
I joked with Simon & Schuster, who published it. I said at one point, it's really Zen and the Art of Guide Dog Travel. Like that old Robert Pirsig book from the 60s, Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance. I mean, it's not about motorcycles, and in a way it's about guide dogs, but it's also about learning to love your life, learning to admire and appreciate the wisdom of dogs, learning to discovering that you can go anywhere you want, anytime you want with a guide dog. There's a section in the book where after I get Corky, I go to New York City with her just on a lark, right, on a whim. And we spend 3 days just going everywhere in New York just because we can. I go to a Mets game. I go to Coney Island. I go to a jazz club, right? And I write about how formerly in my life I hadn't felt that I had that kind of independence and freedom. And so pretty quickly I discover, right, with Corky that she's making me a bigger, more open, more flexible, more curious, and more secure person. And so in a way, the book becomes about developing a kind of spiritual life, a more trusting, outgoing, and even lovely life. And so it's really, that's why it's called A Poet's Journey, not just because I began my writing career as a poet, but because it's a poet's eye on what makes a dog a thrilling and wonderful companion, really for anybody, right? This is not a book just about disability. It's for anybody who loves dogs.
I think you're a little modest, Steve, because I only had time to read a couple of pages since I just got the book last night. But you describing what it's like to maneuver traffic and people in a congested city and cars and crossing streets. It was, I told a friend of mine that it was like an e-ticket ride after I had just read 2 pages. It was amazing.
Oh, I'm so glad. Yeah, thank you for saying that, because that's what I was trying to accomplish. That the opening, right? I say, what's it like? And then I take people through a tour of Milan, Italy at night, attached to Corky. And that's what I was trying to accomplish, is like, here's a virtual experience.
I would have never expected that, and so I was so excited to hear that we were interviewing you today, because it was just riveting. I would have never known that there were 8 million things that you could teach another human about feeling what guide dogs do. It was a big emotional ride. I loved it. Really.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. That means a lot.
I'd love to share this book with you. Right now, I have 10 copies to give out to lucky listeners. If you're not lucky enough to get on through, head on over to Amazon or your bookstore and ask for Have Dog Will Travel, A Poet's Journey. Steve Kuusistos joining us, and the author of that. Of course, we'll put links to everything you've heard on today's show over at animalradio.com. Thank you, Steve, for telling us your story. It's so heartwarming.
Hey, listen, you just need to know, I am already a listener to Animal Radio, so this is a thrill for me.
You're listening to Animal Radio. Visit us at animalradio.com or download the Animal Radio app for iPhone and Android.